Welcome to Rex Bar.
Good morning. This is Legal Tidbits. My name is Christopher Marr. I'm an attorney in Mahopac, New York. And it's Friday, March 25th, 2022. And we have a weekly program where we pick a topic and have a brief discussion about it. I find that with many of my clients, they indicate that it's helpful. Today, the topic is driving while impaired by drugs. Driving while impaired by drugs is as much a scourge in this country as driving while intoxicated is. And you only have to read the newspaper and the police blotters and the more unfortunate stories where there's accidents and serious injury and sometimes fatalities. And you realize that the police forces of the country, and especially in the New York metropolitan area where I practice, are on high alert at all hours to detect and root out and arrest people who are driving while intoxicated or driving while impaired by drugs. In New York, we have statutes, laws on the books passed by the legislature in Albany that address both driving while impaired by drugs separately and distinctly from driving while intoxicated by alcohol. And we have a hybrid law that allows for the prosecution of driving while impaired by drugs and alcohol. Today, I want to talk about something that comes up all the time. It has to do with the problem that people put themselves in. And I always say, everybody who watches TV, and clients call me all the time and they say to me, they didn't read me my Miranda rights. Well, those of us who've been doing this for a long time, and 37 years is a long time, know that people who often find themselves in these situations with being pulled over on the side of the road, and they're in the clutches of law enforcement and they're being asked questions. It never ceases to amaze me how often those very same people who say, well, they never read me my Miranda rights, they forget the tenets of Miranda, and it's Miranda versus Arizona, the landmark United States Supreme Court case that established those rights, that you have the right to remain silent. Anything that you say can, and I always emphasize, and will be used against you. And those are the words that come out of the mouth of law enforcement when they finally have you where they find you, oftentimes on the side of a lonely road somewhere late at night, far removed from a lawyer's office or from the reaches of anybody who can help you. And people forget that they have the right to remain silent and that anything they say can and will be used against you. And people very often incriminate themselves, and that's what Miranda is designed to address. They very often incriminate themselves, and if they stopped and thought about it, they would realize that anything they say can and will be used against them. And it will be used against them in New York if they admit that they have been consuming alcoholic beverages, and for purposes of today's discussion, if they admit that they have been taking medication or using some type of drug. Because what happens is, if they admit that they have been, it triggers steps and procedures that law enforcement are designed or have been trained to engage in with, in this case, a motorist who, let's say, may admit that they have been taking prescription medication. You're not saved, and you're not going to be able to get back in your car and drive away or take a cab home or something else if you say, oh, it's something that was prescribed for me by my doctor. I've been around this profession long enough that I can remember when those days you were saved and law enforcement would allow you to go home with somebody else or drive your own car home if you were just to simply say that, oh, well, it was something that was prescribed for me by my doctor. Well, today it's much, much, much different. Today you face the same prosecution that you would face if you were driving while intoxicated by alcohol. And for the most part, the steps and procedures are the same. The steps may be slightly different in the sense that if there's a test that is going to be conducted to determine the presence of alcohol and or drugs and or both in your system, the procedure may involve a blood test or may involve a urine test. It may not be blown into a machine where somebody thinks, well, I haven't been drinking alcohol, so there's no way I'm going to register anything on a breath test. Well, you're right about that, but what you don't remember, and I hope today that you will remember, is that as readily as law enforcement can ask you to blow into a machine, and you can either refuse to blow in the machine and suffer those consequences, which in New York, if it's a first offense and you refuse to blow into the machine not the machine in the street, the little machine, the handheld item that law enforcement often carries around in the trunk of their RMPs. It's a machine back at whatever barracks or station you are transported to. But if you don't agree to blow and consent to blow into that machine, you face a year of revocation of your driving privilege in New York. And that's a revocation, not just a suspension. And a year is a long time to be taking cabs or walking. But you can be asked if there's a determination that you have been consuming medication or you've been consuming some type of street drug. You can be asked to submit to a urine test or a blood test. And if you refuse those and you claim, well, I'll blow in the machine, and sometimes people say to me, well, I told them I'd blow in the machine, but it looks from the paperwork like the police officer or the trooper was asking the person to submit to a blood test or a urine test. Your fate is potentially the same. You potentially suffer a loss of your driving privilege, and you have to make determinations on the spot. I tell people all the time, it doesn't cost them anything to have my phone number, my cell phone number on speed dial, and it's 914-400-8379. That's 914-400-8379. People who do remember that and do put it in their phone along with their other important phone numbers for contact information purposes, they know that they can reach me any hour of the day or night, and very often they do. And very often it's as they are being pulled over or as they're in some type of a barracks somewhere and they're being asked to submit to one of these tests. So I tell people all the time, you got to remember what Miranda says. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will, and I always emphasize, and will be used against you. It's not that it may be used against you or might be used against you. It very affirmatively will be used against you. So you really need to think before you address a stranger, just like you wouldn't have a discussion with a stranger somewhere on the street during normal business hours about what medications you're on or whether your sister or your aunt or some family member had some type of medication in the house and you had a pain and you decided to take those OxyContins for the pain. You wouldn't have that type of discussion with a stranger. You can't assume that if you have that discussion with a stranger who happens to be dressed in law enforcement uniforms, that the repercussions are going to be any less benign. They're going to be far more severe because you've put yourself in a situation where you're forgetting what your Miranda rights are and you're not calling myself or somebody else that you have on speed dial who is available and does understand these situations better than most other people do. So the rule for today is put that phone number on speed dial, and you've got to give some serious thought before you open your mouth and start sharing personal information with somebody who happens to have pulled you over on the side of the road. Or if I just come up with a story, maybe he or she will let me go home. And it doesn't work like that anymore, ladies and gentlemen. It just doesn't. It did many, many years ago when I started in this profession, but I've seen the profession change dramatically. Police work is much, much more aggressive these days, and police are much, much more highly trained in ferreting out people who are impaired by drugs, as the subject of today's discussion is. So that's the legal tidbit for today. Have a good, safe weekend, and I'll see you next Friday. Welcome to Legal Tidbits with attorney Christopher X. Marr.